Falling Through the Ropes, the Australian edition. G'day. I'm pro wrestling's oldest rookie interviewer, Southern Joe, and we've got ourselves one hell of a guest this week. We've got Ken, the Dazzler Dunlop. How are you, Mr. Dunlop?
I'm very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, doing pretty good, thank you. Doing pretty good. This is interview number 2 for me. So, and for folks there, hoping you really like what we do here with Falling Through the Ropes. This is the Australian edition of Falling Through the Ropes. There's also Falling Through the Ropes Extra, and also if you like what we do, subscribe, share, and make comments. And also, don't forget the parent channel, the Best of British Wrestling. Did you ever go to Britain and wrestle?
Yes, in 1992.
Okay. Did you wrestle a variety of feds, or who'd you go to?
Yeah, we worked for Dale Martin Promotions, and when we had days off, we worked for Orig Williams. So we had three different nights with Orig Williams as well. So it was a very interesting learning curve.
Okay. So you debuted in about 77 or 78?
78, yes. I was 17 years old. 11th of August, 1978.
Okay, and how'd you go in your first match?
It was very good, yeah. We were very nervous because it was both our first matches, so we only had to do like 10 minutes, so it was quite good.
Was that on a live show, or was that actually on TV?
That was a live show.
Okay, and that was down in Melbourne, yeah?
Yeah, I think it was Wassonia RSL.
Oh, crikey, that's not that far away from me.
Yeah, Sam Rossi and Casey Miller were the promoters of that show, and they were two of my original trainers. There was 5 people training me at the beginning. There was Sam Rossi, Fred Berger, Casey Miller, John Snyder, and Jimmy DeMeros.
Okay. So
they had a gymnasium in North Melbourne, so that was where I started.
Okay, so Jim Barnett had left Australia by then, had he?
Yes, I just come in at the end. Unfortunately, I started in the August, and then in December '78 is when World Championship Wrestling finished. But Barnett went about 75, I think. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought he went much later.
No, Ron Miller and Larry O'Day took over.
Okay, yes, okay, but they still had TV for a while, but then I believe it was due to bad ratings.
World Series cricket. No, they had fantastic ratings. They were really shocked actually when they got dumped because they had fantastic ratings, and it was because of the World Series cricket.
Oh, right.
Very practical time. That's the only reason it stopped.
Okay. And when you started out, who was your biggest influence to get into the business?
Well, as a kid, I was going to Festival Hall all the time. As a teenager, I started going when I was about 12, every Saturday night with Mum to Festival Hall. And when you go along all the time, you get to meet some of the local guys, and I become good friends with John Snyder and Sam Rossi. And I got to know their families as well. And they knew I loved wrestling, and I was just wrestling crazy. And from the age of 8, I always said I wanted to be a professional wrestler. And when I turned 16, they asked me if I wanted to learn. So I was hooked.
And see, because you wrestled through till about 2002? That's correct?
2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you basically sort of straddled that era between when wrestling was full kayfabe getting into the era where sort of the veil's getting lifted a little bit.
Yeah. I was still very old school, and I worked fairly stiff, and I wanted all the guys I taught wrestling as well worked fairly stiff, so to make it believable, and I always wanted to make it believable still. I didn't want to give everything away.
Yeah. Because I remember when you did that interview with that young lady, I can't remember her name, when it was on SBS where they interviewed Mr. Barnett and Mario Milano and yourself, and I think Larry O'Day as well.
Yeah, a long time ago. A show called Eat Carpet, I think. We did one on SBS. There was Eat Carpet and also Vox Vopolis. So we did 2 shows on SBS at that time.
I think it might have been the Vox Populis then, because I only accidentally caught that. I said, "Oh, jeepers, that's Mario Milano." And then you were there talking. I remember specifically you were talking about how you love playing the bad guy.
Yeah. Just to have
Yeah,
that power, to have people hate your guts so much, and then again, if you're good enough, you can turn them like that to love you within 10 seconds. So that's the psychology of wrestling is fantastic, and that is what is sadly lacking, unfortunately, today. I think the psychology of it all.
I agree because I think about the only person who actually can make you feel something is MJF. He's probably about the only one because I don't watch a lot, but I see bits and pieces of what I like rather than sit through a whole show now, especially because some of the shows basically are just full of skits with 2 minutes of wrestling.
Yeah, that's the trouble. Yeah, there was a thing done recently on the 3 hour shows of Monday Night Raw, and there was only about 37 minutes of wrestling on the whole show in 3 hours. And on AEW, I think it was 1 hour 10. So that's pretty poor.
Yeah, I know. Because also too, in that actual SBS episode, the woman asked the provocative question that would usually get a bad reaction, like say what you might call a John Stossel reaction. So you know what question I'm saying about. I always wondered if instead of if a reporter asked you instead of saying just outright saying, "Oh, is it fake?" If they said to you, "Is it true that the matches are predetermined?" If they try to ask it to you in a roundabout way like that, how would you have responded?
Depending on the era, like again, back in when I first started in the 70s and 80s, was still very kayfabe.
Mm-hmm.
I would have said no, probably. I would have lied. But later on, I probably would have said yes, that is the situation. Because it's different eras, different times, and it's just nowadays it's just too exposed, and everyone knows, and they don't care about showing it, unfortunately. And yeah, it's even when I was working, like we talk to each other in the ring, but I would never let anyone see me talk. And I
Well,
had friends who were going to the shows, and they used to watch for it, and they said we never saw you talk.
they caught you. They could see where you talked, or you were able to hide it.
I was able to hide it, yeah.
Mm.
You didn't need much because when you work, because again we had the same guys you work with fairly often. There was no need to sort of talk. It was only a couple of times here and there, and it would be just one word, and you knew what they were doing. So a few times, if you couldn't understand someone or didn't hear them, they throw you to the ropes. You just come out with an open chest and hope for the best.
Well, I actually even heard on one of the American podcasts that say um, race and funk would be sitting in the back and they'd say, "What do we give them? The Kansas show, the Texas show, or this other show?" And if depending on what the other one said, they knew exactly what to do without having to really sort of communicate.
Yeah, well, when you're working with the same person so often, you don't need to. Like we never plan the matches like they do today. Today, every second of the match is planned, and that's very obvious too in most cases.
Yeah.
Where we would just plan a very quick start, a spot in the middle, and the finish. And
Mm.
we used to go between 20 and 40 minutes on average. The
Mm-hmm.
rest was just called in the ring. And you just, again, you work with people so you know them, you trust them, and you just go with the flow.
But you just called it in the ring, and then you just knew what the finish was and maybe what different angle you had to get over.
Yeah. And not all the time too. Like we had times here in Sydney, especially the club scene was fantastic in the 80s. It was a brilliant time. And on a Sunday, we could have 3 shows in one day. And I did all 3. And when I got to the last show on this one occasion, I turned up at the club during the show because the last show was between, say, 4 and 6. The next show started at 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on the first match of the second show, had to jump in the car, in my gear, just with the trackie over top, go to the next club, which lucky enough wasn't too far away. The first match was on, and they didn't go home till they saw me walk through the doors. So I walked in the back of the hall down into the dressing rooms. As soon as they saw me, they went to the finish. So I got into the dressing room and my music started. I didn't even know who I was wrestling. So I had to just quickly take off my tracky dacks and jump in the ring. And it was the referee who had to tell me, okay, you're working with so-and-so, you're doing 20 minutes, you're going over. And everything was just talking in the ring. So that does happen. And I don't think the guys of today could cope with that sort of thing.
Oh no, it's amazing though, because I mean, usually you got an idea beforehand. Because was that just a match set up cold, or were you in the middle of a feud?
No, set up cold.
Did it end up did that end up leading to like a feud because it went well or something like that?
To be honest with you, I can't remember. That's one thing I've had. I've had a lot of concussions, and my memory's not sensational. Put it that way.
No, fair enough. But well, who are some of your most memorable opponents?
Oh, Kenny Medlin, of course, would be the highest profile one. George Barnes, Andy Harpus and Mario Milano. I worked with Cognac Avides a lot down in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
Wayne Pickford, of course, my partner. I wrestled Wayne probably close to 100 times as well as opponents, as well as doing. We were a tag team for like 15 years, but we separated a few different times because there was that sort of needed at the moment. And so I had lots of great opponents.
What about overseas opponents or partners?
The best one I wrestled overseas was Danny Boy Collins in England. He was sensational. And that was another funny story there, because when we got to the show, like, because we were based in Leeds and everyone had a meeting point, excuse me, and they'd go to a show on a little minibus they had. And Danny Boy wasn't on the bus. So we drove from Leeds to Wick in Scotland, which is the top of Scotland. It took us 10 hours in the minibus.
Jeepers.
And I was wrestling Danny in the main event, and it was interval, and I still hadn't met him. And I'm thinking, what the hell? We were on in, like, there was one more match before us than we were on. And he just walked into the dressing room about 10 minutes before the match and just said, I'm Danny. We're doing, I think, because in England in 92, they were still doing rounds. And I hated rounds. I said, mate, can we just I said, can we just do 45 minutes straight through? He said, can you last that long? I said, easy, no problems. So he said, yeah, we'll just do that. And then he just said, he gave me one spot, and he asked me for one of my spots. And he said, I'll work stiff. I said, oh, good, so do I. And then he just walked out of the room. And that was it. And it was probably the best match of my career.
What would happen when you had someone who didn't like working stiff? Was it like tough cheeks?
I was actually, I mean, there's a lot of guys work soft, especially in England, like, especially for Dale Martin Promotions. They had a lot of young guys, and I mean, there was some good young talent there, but they worked so loose. I was really shocked how loose they worked. And again, some of them were so inexperienced, and that was sort of a bit upsetting for me. Like, there was one young guy, and I just can't remember his name. He was from a certain area, and they wanted me to put him over to build him up really big, because he was on TV doing commercials and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And I just said to him right at the beginning, I gave him like all these spots, bang, 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 a real fast start. And he's just sitting there looking like a stunned mullet. He didn't know what I was talking about. And I'm thinking, oh, Jesus. And we had to do, I think it was 6 3 or 4 minute rounds. And he was going to go over in the last round. And I was actually putting myself into holds because he didn't know what to do. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, it's embarrassing. So beginning of the third round, I just said, oh, stuff it. And I just took over and I beat the crap out of him and I pinned him. So I got into trouble for it, but he was just hopeless, you know. So, I mean, hopefully he improved and he went on, but
he was meant to go. He was meant to go over.
He was meant to go over, yeah.
Oh, crikey's. Oh.
Yes, I upset the boss there. Max Crabtree was the booker or the owner of the company, and yeah, he wasn't very happy. But I said, mate, he was hopeless. He didn't know nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. Yeah.
So
So I wasn't going to embarrass myself.
why do the British go with rounds? Why is it to make it seem like it's boxing, or to go with a sports feel?
It could have been maybe a law too back in the day, and they just kept it going. I don't know. But when we worked on the shows for Orig Williams, that was different.
Mm-hmm.
His shows were more like WE style, and they had bigger guys, more experienced guys, and there was no rounds. They were just 20-minute matches, and each time we worked with the same people. There was a guy called John Nobbs and Peter LeParc, and Wayne and I both worked with one of them as a singles, and of course we always interfered in each other's matches to get DQ'd. Then we'd have the tag match at the end of the night as well.
Oh,
So
you
I
dirty
actually
heel.
I preferred working for Orig Williams because, again, it was just more experienced, more professional show. But the most embarrassing night over there was I had to wrestle Big Daddy. Oh,
Oh,
in
crikey.
the tag. That was absolute a joke, absolute embarrassment. The worst match of my career. I had Big Daddy, then I had Danny Boy Collins. So the worst match and the best match in 1 week.
Yeah, because I heard he's not very good wasn't very good as a worker, but his gimmick got him over.
I don't want to be, well, I would. I'm always honest. He was a pig. He was an absolute pig of a person.
Mm-hmm.
Egotistical old fool, couldn't do anything. The tag matches were 13 minutes. Doesn't matter who he was against. It was the same tag match every single night. And I forget who I put. They didn't put me with Wayne. They put me with one of their regular guys over there as a tag.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying all these comedy spots, and I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And he said, you got to, it's the daddy tag. I said, mate, I'm not a fucking clown. I'm not doing that,
Mm-hmm.
And even in the beginning, like his nephew, Scott Valentine, he wrestled as, he was a really nice guy. He was his partner, and he was a bit inexperienced as well. So again, I tried to get a fast start going with him, and he just didn't know what I was doing. So I ended up taking over and smashing him a bit, and I got out of their little realm, and Daddy didn't like it. And when Daddy came in to do his comedy spots, I just jumped off the apron and turned my back. And the other guy sort of tried to cover up, and when I got back in the ring doing my stuff, he's leaning over the ropes going, you're fucking the daddy tag, you're fucking the daddy tag.
Oh, crikey. Oh, dear.
So at the end, again, I got in trouble with Max for not following the rules.
Did the match at least get over with the crowd?
Oh, the crowd loved it because he won. He pinned the other guy and did all his bullshit. So, yeah, they were happy. So, yeah, but it was just an embarrassment.
So you've wrestled overseas. You're a wrestler. You've been a referee as well, and a promoter.
I did. Yeah, I promoted for 8 years. Refereed off and on whenever I needed. Commentated, did everything. So I started off putting the ring up, put the ring down, and all that sort of stuff. So when I first started in Melbourne, again working mainly for Sam and Casey, like part of the apprenticeship was putting the ring up, pulling the ring down. We did shows in Lygon Street, Carlton, for the Greek Festival. And there was one Sunday morning, it was absolutely bucketing down with rain. And,
you did an outdoor show?
Yeah, it was in the streets of Lygon Street. We had to put the ring up, and then I had to wrestle. And then after the show, pull it down, and it was absolutely bucketing down with rain. But we still got a huge, huge crowd, so it was great.
Oh,
but there's all learning experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, apart from all that, you're also an author as well. You've autobiography. How good you got it? I was going to ask you that. Yeah. So that's called Dazzler Dunlop. Inside my square circle. And
it was released through Shoreline Publishing Group. They gave me the chance to publish. I'd sit there after I retired. I'd sit around and talk to some of the wrestling friends and fans who I'm still good friends with. And we'd all sit around and tell stories, and they all kept saying, oh, you should write a book, you should write a book. And it was in the back of my mind to do it, but I never had time because after I finished wrestling, I was still working a full-time job and I was doing like 60 hours a week. So I didn't have a lot of spare time. And then I ended up having to retire in 2017 at the age of 56, unfortunately, because of bad health. And the first thing I thought when I retired was, right, I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to pen it first to see how it comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it took me 2 years to write because because the memory's not that great. I started doing it all by hand, writing everything by hand. I'd do chapters by chapters, and then I'd go back to it. I'd come back to it. Then I went overseas for a whole couple of holidays, so I took a month or 2 months off, and then I had to sort of put it all together. And I sent it around to about 9 or 10 publishing companies, and 3 got back to me and were interested. So and I ended up going with Shoreline, and they've done a great job publicising my book and promoting my book. So it's going really well.
Yeah, because I read some of the publicity stuff, because the book's been out for a couple of years now, hasn't it?
It'll be 2 years in November, yeah.
And so in it, you describe like your coming out, yeah.
Because back in the day, again, like in the late 70s, like when I was 16, like I was on such a high because starting to learn to wrestle, it was my childhood dream from the age of 8.
Yep.
And so I was on a really, really high there, but then at the same time dealing with my sexuality. And that was, again, in those days, it was never talked about. It was never discussed. There was no helplines. I didn't know anyone who was gay, so it was a real struggle. And so sort of dealing with the highs and lows at the same time was really, really hard.
Well, I'm 59, so I know what those days were like for the folks who had that who are gay, because when you're growing up, there was a lot. I mean, if we told millennials some of the things that people would say in school and so forth, they'd be horrified. And it was just ignorance in those days.
Definitely.
It was ignorance in those days, and now, okay, I don't want to say, oh, I'm enlightened, because I don't want to sound like I'm woke, but basically I'm educated in that that's how you feel. That's you have to be who you are.
I moved to Sydney in 20. I think I was 20 years old. So 1980, I moved to Sydney, and that was a real eye opener for me. Again, the first time I went to Oxford Street, I freaked out seeing guys holding hands, girls holding hands. I thought, wow. And I actually felt like I fit in here and I can be myself. And I'd only told one guy, well, no, 2 guys actually, that I was gay. One was John Snyder, who was sensational, and he was a big, rude of a man. He was great. And my first opponent, because we trained together so much, I told him. But otherwise, I didn't. At that stage, I hadn't told any of my family or my friends. So when I moved to Sydney, it sort of just was such an eye opener. And then pretty much when I started training with people, I came out straight away. And from then on, I've been out ever since then. But it was still pretty hard because it was still illegal to be gay, I think, until 1984. You know, people were getting bashed on the streets, and at one stage I lived down near Bondi Beach, and that's where some of the murders happened, and gangs were going around beating guys up and that sort of stuff. So
no, I was just going to say that's not far away from when the AIDS broke out, and when AIDS broke out, everyone thought that was a gay disease originally.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember so much on that, how that was treated, and then some of the shocks you found out about, some people, like say Rock Hudson, finding out that he was gay, and that was like the biggest shock, because nobody would have guessed that. If nobody would have had that on their bingo card.
Yeah, well, that's the trouble. They had to hide who they were. They couldn't be themselves.
Yeah.
That'd be very hard to live. And even like I dealt with depression, dealing with it all. Like I was having a great time because I was just being a real whore. I was going out having sex like as much as I could. It's so easy to get sex anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and I still hadn't told my family at that stage. So I was sort of dealing with a little bit of depression, and also moving to Sydney. I only knew my grandparents. I didn't know anybody up here at all. So I was very lonely, and I was a very home person in Melbourne. I loved my family, and I was very close to my family,
Mm-hmm.
and I was missing them absolutely like crazy. And so I sort of went into a bit of a depression cycle, and unfortunately, it is in the book. I actually did try to commit suicide once.
Oh.
I took a handful of sleeping pills, drank a few cans of beer, and I went down to Bondi Beach, and I was going to throw myself off the rocks.
Uh-huh.
Lucky enough, there was someone jogging, come along and just saw me standing there crying and took me aside. And I know there was a park bench there. So I know he sat me down, and then I just remember waking up in bed 2 days later. I don't remember anything else.
Oh.
So then I rang a friend of mine he had a good friend who was a psychiatrist, and she agreed to see me that day. And I had a really good chat with her, and then I flew down to Melbourne, and that's when I came out to all the family, and that was such a huge relief.
How did they take to it?
Pretty good. Dad was a bit shocked.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say nothing on the night. He just got up and walked out of the room, went to bed, and the next day he didn't say nothing to me. And I thought, oh, Jesus. So the day after that, I just said, look, I'm going back to Sydney. I'm really sorry. And he said, no, stay. He said, look, I don't understand it. He said, you're my son. I love you. Just don't talk about it.
And how was the locker room with that?
Most of it was okay. There's a couple of older guys hated me, and I'm pretty sure that's the reason why. And I, when I wrote the book originally, I named both guys.
Oh, cool.
But when the publishing company, they do a legal check, they come back and said, "Oh,
Better
you
not
can't
name them.
name them."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it'd be a
because it could
slander.
get,
And I suppose
yeah,
in that case it'd be like a he said type situation, wouldn't it?
yeah. So in the book, I just call them asshole 1 and asshole 2.
Fair enough.
They
There was
used
that.
to beat the living shit out of me.
Oh, crikeys. Because it's only in recent years, sort of delving into podcasts and so forth, I found out that like Jim Barnett was gay.
Oh, very obviously he was gay. Yeah, yeah.
But was that something that was known down here at the time, or when he was?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Because that's even like going back in the 60s and 70s, because that's at a time when it was even more, like no type thing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because at least in the 80s, things were starting to become enlightened in some respects, but not as much as now. Nowhere near as much as
Yeah.
now. But it was better in the 80s than the 70s. Not that much better, but it was
Yeah.
just there was light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, Roy Heffernan, because when I moved to Sydney, that was one of the best things I had. She got to be trained by Roy Heffernan,
Mm-hmm.
and he became like a second father to me. I'd go around to his house once or twice a week, and just an absolute gem of a man. And some of the stories he'd tell from the days, because he was traveling the world for 14 years, and he told me there was a few wrestlers who were gay in the days back in the 60s and that over there, 50s and 60s, and they could never come out. He told me some of their names, and I'll never ever say their names publicly, of course, because I said, I mean, some of them are dead, obviously, but they never came out, which is sad.
The only ones that I sort of knew that came out, like Pat Patterson, he came out.
Yeah,
Took a while, and because I even heard I think it was Bruce Pritchard said a funny story when he was wrestling with Ray Stevens, and someone in the crowd called Ray Stevens one of the derogatory gay names, and Pat apparently just sort of said to him, "If only they knew,"
Yeah.
because he was the one.
Well,
Actually,
what happened to me once up here in Sydney, I was at a show, and because in the 80s, when I, again, just coming out, or not coming out, but being fully open and everything, I did all the things that gay teenagers did. I had, not early 20s, I had my ears pierced, I had my hair permed and all that sort of crap, and blonde tips and all that sort of shit put through, which is part of the time.
mm-hmm.
And one night I was at a show and I forgot to take my earring out. And my opponent on the night, the referee was giving us the instructions, which normally he'd just tell us a funny story or a joke or whatever, but the people think he's telling us the instructions. The guy just looked at me and said, "You effing," and he used the other word, F word, which I hate that word. You've got your earring in, and he just pulled it and ripped it out.
Oh, crikey.
And I've still got the scar down the side of my ear from that. And again, I was just in shock. I didn't know what. And the blood was just pouring out of my ear. And we just went into our normal match. And I was sort of stunned. And we did 20 minutes afterwards, never apologised, nothing. And yeah, I was just stunned. And I lost all my respect for that guy that night. So yeah, I was quite shocked.
Now, we've got a video lined up to watch along. This is my first time doing that. Well, don't forget, this is my second interview. And it is a match from 1985 from Festival Hall with Ken Medlin. Now, when I was approaching you about this interview, you said this was like a dream match for you. Why was that?
Well, I said when I was a kid, like going to Festival Hall every Saturday night, there were two wrestlers who were my favourites. There was Ken Medlin and Johnny Gray. And I tried, when I first started learning, I tried to sort of copy their styles, and Johnny Gray's style suited me better. But Ken Medlin, to me, was the best Australian wrestler I ever seen. And getting to wrestling him, I've wrestled him probably 100 times in the end, which is fantastic. But Festival Hall already finished, but that was the best venue in Australia to wrestle at. And of course, Jack Little, who was such an icon, and I became good friends with Jack, and he used to come to our house, and it was just fantastic. He came to my 21st, my 18th at the house. So when this mob toured in '85, and they were doing Festival Hall, and the first night was me and Medlin, and Jack Little was a compere. I thought, this is my 12-year-old dream come true.
Okay, I'll whack the video on.
Before you put it on,
go for it.
Can I just give us a little plug? There's a guy up here, Jamie Apps, who's brought out a series of Australian wrestling cards, and he's doing all the local guys from all around Australia, not just Sydney or Melbourne, just Perth guys, Adelaide guys.
Yep.
He's got referees, commentators, and he actually got me to do a card. So here it is there. Hopefully you can see it.
I can see it, yeah.
Australian wrestling cards.
Sorry, you went mumbly a bit then. So what was the address, the web address?
It's Australian wrestling cards.
Australian wrestling cards.
Yeah.
Is that .com.au?
If you just look up that, it'll come up on Facebook It's through Mario magazine, but he's doing a fantastic job, and they're going really well. And he's done about 3 series so far, and he's got another 4 or 5 series coming up. So it's fantastic.
That's really good. So it's a combination of old school and new school wrestlers in the cards, or just old school ones?
I'm the first old fart he's got on there. all the rest are all the current people, but he did an interview with me for another magazine, and when he started doing the cards, I said, "What a great idea." And he said, "Would you be interested?" And I'm the first oldie he's put on, so that's great.
We see a lot of action, a lot of body
So now Jack Little stayed. He stayed in Australia after the TV went.
Yeah, Jack was on Channel 9 in Melbourne. He used to do the news as well. And he did a game show with Tommy Hanlon Jr. as well.
Okay.
And he also did 3 or 4 stage plays, which a lot of people don't know about. Yeah.
Well, see, because I'm originally from Sydney. I came down here in 1990, so you'd never in Sydney you just never heard about Jack Little after the TV went off.
No, he had his own radio show as well. He was very, very popular man, very, very well liked, very well respected. Every wrestler respected him. So, and it was Jack who actually gave me the first chance, because again, this other guy, Rob Magri, who was training with me at the same time at the beginning, when they thought we were ready to wrestle, like I was only 17, I think Rob was a year older than me. They brought Jack Little down to the gym, because they said, we only got to push one of you. So Jack washed just trained for 2.5 hours. And they said, Jack, who are we going with? And he went, Little Kenny.
So Jack was, for our international, anyone that doesn't know, Jack Little was an American that came out probably, in the 60s when Mr. Barnett first started out here?
Yes.
And he was like the compere introducing the matches, and he had a really gravelly voice. Welcome to the matches. Sort of that sort of real gravelly. It was like a mouthful of gravel.
He was sensational.
It added to the authenticity of like you're watching a sport, not sports entertainment.
Well, he also commentated on wrestling in America before he came to Australia.
Okay.
And he knew Barnett, and what was the other guy's name? It was John Doyle, I think his name was.
Johnny Doyle, yep.
Yeah. He knew them from overseas. So when he came to Australia, he came out here before the wrestling started here, and he used to do ringside with the wrestlers on Channel 10 in the time. I think it was called Channel O back then.
Yes, it would have been. In Melbourne, it was Channel O.
Yeah, and he said to Barnett, come out to Australia, and they had this most successful run.
Okay, but he's not on this commentary. The commentary sounds like, would that be Ted Whitten that's commenting?
No, Paul Jennings.
Who, sorry?
Paul Jennings.
Paul Jennings. Is that Paul Jennings as in the guy that does impersonations and so forth?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Because he used to do, he compared with Jack Little as well. Jack did the ring intros at the beginning of the match.
Yes.
And then Paul did the commentary for the tapes there.
Well, some nice go arounds and so forth. In this match, what struck me was Ken Medlin, who he's no longer with us now, is he?
They only died about a month ago, aged 82.
Yes, that's right. I remember reading about that. This is an interesting spot. You're there jumping to the ropes and buddy hopping on your shoulders. But Ken Medlin, he's got a physique and a look like Dynamite Kid.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
And because I always remembered him as more lanky, because towards the end of the TV run, he was sort of a mid-carder, or sometimes he'd be there as to put one of the big stars over.
Well, he was billed as the Australian lightweight champion for a long time, and he had some great runs with Mike Dallas, El Greco, Harold Calivris.
Mm-hmm.
He had some sensational matches, and he had great matches with Johnny Gray as well, and George Barnes, all those sort of guys. So yeah, he got a fairly good push as the light heavyweight champion.
Okay, yeah, because he was good. Yeah, I remember Johnny Gray and George Barnes, and George Barnes got a good run in America with when he hooked up with Bill Dundee.
Yeah.
So that was amazing to see. And you said Ken Medlin was the best wrestler you saw. So you put him over Ron Miller?
Yes.
In what reason would that be?
I mean, Ron was a great wrestler. Ron had great ring psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have a great ring personality. I mean,
Yeah,
he
I
wrestled
suppose he was
like
very, yeah.
he wrestled Dory Funk Jr., Harley Race, and he always made it look so believable. And he got the Aussie. Everyone thought he was a great local Aussie sort of guy, but to me, he didn't have that personality where Medlin could wrestle anybody technically, and he had the personality. His ring psychology was just tops. So
Yeah.
he'd be my number one. And then Johnny Gray, number two, then Ron Miller.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I remember because Johnny Gray, he once was the last one left on a TV battle royal with Andre the Giant, and he looked like he was going to crap himself because he was left there with Andre the Giant, and because they're both baby faces, Andre calls for the check, rips it in half, and gives him half of it to say, "Here,
Well, they
you
did the
share
same.
the prize money."
They did the same with Kim Medlin, funny enough.
Okay.
Yeah, and Medlin one time in one of the rumbles, Andre sat on him and actually broke one of Kenny's ribs.
Oh, crikey. Was that just an accidental thing, or was that Andre
No,
taking
accidental.
accidental?
No,
Okay.
accidental. Because I did a tour with Andre. I'm not sure what year now. It would have been late 80s or early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was around then. I'm not sure. But and when Andre walked into the room, he actually recognised Kenny straight away, and he went up and shook his hand and said, "Oh, hello, my friend." And yeah, so it was really good. The respect was there, so it was great. And the funny thing on that night, there was Killer Khan. No, sorry, it was Don Morocco and Andre the Giant and Kerry Brown from Canada. They were the three stars they brought out for this series of shows. And I was wrestling Kenny Medlin on the first match. Now, Larry O'Day and Ron Miller were the promoters.
Mm-hmm.
And Larry come up to us beforehand and said, "Don't do too much stuff. Don't do nothing off the top rope, nothing outside. Keep it simple." And our matches were pretty high impact because by that stage we'd wrestled a lot. And I looked at Kenny and I said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And he just said, "Fuck 'em, we'll do the lot." So we just did our normal 25-minute match. And as I was walking out towards the dressing room, Andre the Giant and Don Morocco were standing there. And I thought, oh, no.
Oh, in trouble
And
now.
they both patted me on the back, shook my hand, said, fantastic match, fantastic match. I thought, oh, thank God for that. When we walked into the dressing room, Larry O'Day was pulling his hair out. He's gone red in the face. He's yelling at both of us. What the hell did you two just do? Blah, blah, blah. How can we follow that? And Medlin just said, if you're not good enough to follow, you shouldn't be on the card.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I've heard many stories where two wrestlers would be curtain jerking, as they say, and there'd be the opening match to put on a real flyer to really set the mood for the whole card, really. And they'll walk in and just say, "Follow that, guys." And I don't see anything wrong with that because it's good to have competition in the locker room, is it not?
It is. You should build up your cards. You should have say 15-minute match. All matches have to be good. You can't have a bad match. And then you should build up, and the main event obviously should be the main. And it didn't matter because Andre was in the main event anyway, so the crowd just there mainly to see him. So
yeah,
it didn't matter. And Larry O'Day, in the end, after the tour, he sacked me for about 2 months.
Oh, crikey.
Yeah. So that was just part of it, and then Ron Miller rang me up 2 months later. Can you come back to work? It was a funny little story.
This match we're watching, what place was this on the card? Was this like a main event, or is it?
That was the first match, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So who was headlining this show that night?
I think it was the Cuban Assassin, and the Youngbloods. The Youngbloods, Mark and Jay Youngblood, were the main event. They did
Okay.
a tag against Cuban Assassin and I think Samoan Joe. I think.
Samoa Joe?
I don't think it was that one.
No,
I'm not
perhaps
sure.
someone
I
else.
don't think so. Yeah, there's been 2 or 3 Samoan Joes over the years, so
But
yeah,
okay,
I'm pretty.
so was this like a generic Samoan, or was it one of the Inoes, or?
He was Samoan, yeah. He was a big
Yeah,
guy.
but like
Yeah.
he's not related to like the wild Samoans.
I couldn't tell you. I
Yeah.
didn't speak to him much. He was a very quiet man.
Okay.
Some of the young bloods, they just kept to themselves pretty much all the time. They didn't hardly talk to us.
Okay. Did you did you find them to be good blokes anyway, even if they were quiet?
So,
Did you find them to be good blokes anyway, if they were quiet?
oh yeah, they always come in. They always said hello, shook hands, and we had a little bit of small talk. Because what happened the days we were doing these shows, like we were working 5 days a week, and if there was a day off, we had to go to the guy who owned the business at the time. He had a car yard in Footscray, and that was where his office was. And he also owned, there was a Wendy's burger joint next door, and he owned the land there as well. So we had to be sitting around the office for like 6 hours or 7 hours on the day. So again, we all got to sit down and talk to each other, and so I did have a few little chats to them, but they were very quiet.
Mm-hmm. And who's the referee in this one?
Vic Ferrari.
Oh, they do mention that in the commentary. So that's probably one I don't, because I don't he would have come around after the TV era, like after the Tony Marinos and so forth.
Yeah. He was a great bloke. He was a very good referee. He refereed for nearly 20 years.
Oh, that's a nice bridge.
He got inducted into the Hall of Fame. I think it was the year I got inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2015, and I think Vic got inducted the year after.
Okay.
2016.
So that's the Australian Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and my younger brother Alan, who wrestled as Red Hot Ricky Diamond in Melbourne, he also got inducted.
Okay,
in 2020 or 2019.
Yeah, I remember.
Alan wrestled for 20 years as well.
Yeah, no, that name I remember, because I did lose a bit of contact on wrestling, because I mean there was no internet at that time. Like between about 1978, 79, when the TV finished, up until about the late 80s, the only time I would actually see wrestling would be if it's in a shopping centre, or what Americans would call a shopping mall. So you'd see 2 or 3 matches, and I used to look forward to going to see those, either at Westfield Parramatta or Seven Hills Shopping Centre or Blacktown or what have you. They were really good. Like, because I was doing other things at night, because I was a mobile DJ back then, so I didn't even hear about any clubs of that. I think I went to one in the late 80s at Ingleburn, and I actually afterwards I met Wayne Pickford and I think Ken Medlin as well, because I somehow got to be friends with this guy up in Sydney who owned a news agency and was like a real super fan.
Yeah, I know him. I'm still good friends with him now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because him and his wife would even go to America to the WrestleManias and what have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I'm still good friends. I had coffee with him about 4 weeks ago.
That's right, Paul. Kenny Dunlop knows what it's about. He knows what he's got to do. And when it looks down and just about out, that's when they get that extra little bit of strength and they come back with something right out of the book.
Here you're working as a babyface, aren't you?
Yes. For most of this promotion, I had to work as a babyface.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with guys like Medlin, I worked with Andy Harpus, Cognac Avides, and because, when I worked with Con, it was a sort of babyface match, but I'd sort of semi-heel.
Okay.
So when I worked in Brisbane or Adelaide, I was a heel. But in Melbourne, for some reason, they wanted me as a babyface. So I think it's because I was a local Melbourne guy, see?
Yeah, I was going to say, sounds like the local boy made good type thing.
Yeah, so they always pushed me as a babyface, but as everywhere else, I was a heel. I've worked off and on as a face or a heel, mainly as a heel, and I love being a heel.
Mm.
But again, when I started promoting, we took over in end of 1990, so we did 91 to 98. So because I was running the shows, I was booking all the shows. Again, I'd wrestle, I'd commentate, I'd referee, I'd do whatever I had to do to fill in at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And depending, because when I took over, I said to Bob Blassie, who was my partner, and Lofty Pigford, we were the three who were running the company. We pretty much got rid of all the old guys straight away. Because I'd trained about a dozen young guys, and there's some other young guys from other jobs coming through from other training centres.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, we're just going to push young talent, get rid of all the old farts and just push young talent. And it was a bit of a risk. I knew we wouldn't have, some matches wouldn't go to plan, of course, I knew that. And so that's when I had to sort of work out myself, like I'd fill in. So if baby faces were short, I'd turn face and I'd team up with the young guys or help the young guys. And then when the young guys were going good, same thing with the heels, I'd turn heel. But I always made sure whenever I worked with all the young guys, even then, like I was only in my early to mid 30s, because I knew the young guys of the future, I was putting them all over clean.
Mm.
And you can still do that and still build yourself up and still, still have a good reputation. It's just all about, again, psychology is the main thing. And building up the future, because you have to build the future up, because you're not going to be there forever.
Yes. Yeah. So,
and I retired a few times, but I always had to come back to cover again. Like 94, I had major troubles with my knees, so I had big operations on the knees. And I took about a year out, and I was going to just commentate and run the shows. And again, same thing. Sometimes someone wouldn't turn up or something happened and we need a filler, so I'd have to fill in and I'd wrestle again. So one interesting thing, again, going back now to the 80s, during the AIDS crisis, because in Sydney, the wrestling was run through the New South Wales Government Department of Sport.
Okay.
And you had to have 2 licensing police at every show, and they were very strict with all their rules. And you weren't allowed to do this, you weren't allowed to do that, you weren't allowed to fight out in the crowd, and they had so many rules. And of course, when AIDS started, there was a rule, no blood.
Yes.
And they were really, really strict on that. So for a couple of years, we did no blood. And there's certain times and certain angles you're building up, you need blood. I think you do. Just again, to tell a good story.
Yeah.
So on this particular night, I was commentating the show with Bob Blassie. And I said, right, there's going to be blood tonight. Lots of blood.
Oh.
And they looked at me and they said, who? And I said, me and Bob, the 2 commentators.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So just it's really threw everything in the spanner of the works. So the heels, of course, absolutely killed the baby faces, and they were just smashing up. I went into the ring to stop them. They attacked me, hit me over the head with a chair, so I juiced. Bob came in to save me. They attacked Bob, and they ripped our shirts off and our jackets, and they kicked the shit out of us. Then some other baby faces come in with a big save. Well, of course, the crowd absolutely popped like crazy. The licensing police, one of them come down to the dressing room, and it was a woman, and she was just yelling, "Yeah, there's blood, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Hang on, not one wrestler on our card bled tonight." I said, "Get out." I said, "Get out of my dressing room." And
so that's how you got around it. Oh,
yeah. And then after that, the laws relaxed. So then we did a couple of cage matches, and we did a chain match, and we had a little bit of juice here and there. So, but also like with me juicing, again being gay, I said to the guys, "Are you comfortable? And do you feel safe?" You know, and they were all comfortable and safe with that. So yeah.
Okay. So now, just with this match, you've lost via count out. What was the story there?
I
It looked
didn't
like,
see it.
yeah,
I thought it
it
was a pinfall.
oh, well, it just looked like, because you're on the outside of the ring and they've raised Ken's hand, Ken Medlin
Oh,
being.
it could have been, yeah.
So
Yeah, I
hang
can't
on,
remember.
we'll just track it at the end here. We'll just track it at the end, because I paused it so you could finish your story. Because that was a very interesting story, and it was very clever how you got around that blood rule.
Yeah, you got too far.
Yeah, no. So Ken went over via count out. Okay. Now I'm just going to get over to where I stopped sharing the screen. Oh, crikeys. As I said, this is my first time to that. I tell you. Oh. Okay. Oh no, there it is. Stop sharing. Yeah, yeah. So
I did some tag team matches with Mario Milano as a partner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was a great help to me. Like, because at the time in Melbourne when I started in '77, as a training with John Snyder and all those guys, Sam Rossi, Mario Milano had a gym set up in Melbourne as well with George Guliovis, if you remember that name. So I went there a few times and trained with them as well. So it was, again, a learning curve of mixing and training with everybody. And when I first came to Sydney, I only wrestled for Steve Rackman for the first 6 months. Because I didn't know I can go and wrestle with the other people. I thought I had to stay loyal to Steve Rackman. And then Mario Milano came up and we met up for coffee and chat. And he said, "Why aren't you wrestling for the other promoters?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know I was allowed to." So he gave me Roy Heffernan's name and number and Larry O'Day and Ron Miller. So straight away I contacted them. Mario must have given him a ring as well. And bang, I started working for everyone. So at sometimes we were doing like 20 shows a month, which was fantastic.
That is really good, and that's back in the '80s as well, was it?
That was, yeah, the '80s was sensational. I guess sometimes the best Sunday we had was 4 shows in one day on a Sunday. So quite often we'd have 2 or 3, but yeah, it was fantastic times. And even on Friday nights, there'd be 2 shows. And again, they worked together. Like Steve Rackman and Roy Heffernan, they were the 2 major promoters, I suppose, because Ron Miller and Larry O'Day only had one club. So they only did extra shows when they brought out Yanks. So, and Roy and Steve would ring each other up and say, "Well, look, we know we've got a show on Friday night. He had a show Friday night. Who are you going to use?" So I'd work both shows. So I'd do the first match at one, drive to the other, and do the main event at the other one.
Roy, I could understand because he'd have the contacts overseas from his time. But when you look at it, like me as a fan, I would have thought Larry O'Day and Ron Miller would have had the bigger promotion because they're the bigger names. Because Steve Rackman, he
Yeah, they
actually,
only had one, yeah, they only had one club. They had South Sydney Juniors, which was run
well,
2 shows a month. That was it.
if,
So,
if you're going to have one club, that's the one to have.
I got to speak to people like I spoke to Lou Thez on the phone twice. I
Wow.
spoke to Stu Hart and Fritz von Erich, and I got to speak to, I think it was JJ Gillen, all through Roy. Like, and in those days, as you said, there was no internet, there was nowhere to sort of send off to get work, and it was very hard to get overseas work back then. You had to send videos and
Yes.
letters. So, and I had a friend in Melbourne and a friend in Sydney who had converting machines. So we did the best highlights of our matches, and we sent them off all around the world. And we actually had a deal with Stu Hart at one stage to work for him.
At
And we
Stampede.
were going to go over there yeah. And unfortunately, about 2 or 3 weeks before we were supposed to go, he rang me up and I spoke to him and his son Bruce, because Bruce was running the office pretty much in those days.
Yeah.
Just something they'd sold the business and the deal was off. So
that's what he sold to Vince.
yeah. So I mean,
bugger.
if I'd gone over, I don't think I'd never have come back. I don't think.
Oh.
No.
Yeah. Because what height are you?
1.7 meters.
Okay, so for the people that deal in Imperial, that's about 5'8", 5'9".
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so, but in a territory back then, you still would have been able to do some good business. Like especially if you went to Stampede, because
yeah.
they had smaller. You probably would have enjoyed the smaller style and the smaller, fast-paced style with people like Dynamite Kid and the Hearts wrestling sort of
Yeah.
that. They wrestled a
I would have
snug
been
style.
training with that. Yeah, I would have been training with them. So that would have been sensational. I was actually devastated when that fell through. Like I cried. I cried my heart out when because I had everything planned. I was quit my job. I was given my notice of where I was going to live. I put all my stuff in storage. I had all planned to do that, and I was just going to go and take a risk. And so I was devastated. But it's funny, even back then, we nearly got into Japan, which was really hard to get because in those days there was only 2 promotions. There was Inoki and Baba.
Yes.
So I sent a video to both of them, and Baba's office contacted us and they were interested. And again, sitting there with Roy Hefner one day, he said, "Let's ring him up." So he just on the phone, and we said, I got to speak to him, and he said we were on the short list, but they only brought in 16 foreigners a year.
Oh, okay.
That was their policy back then. And yes, and unfortunately, it just never happened. So where now you can just pack up your bags and go and wrestle anywhere in the world. And yeah, but back then, again, without the internet, it was just so hard.
Yes, that I can understand that. And in those days, the mid to late 80s, there was competition because there was, from what I used to read and hear in some of the podcasts now, they talked about how some of those schedules were easy and they got really good money and they got treated like kings. And so some of the Americans actually preferred going to Japan. They preferred the Japanese schedule as opposed to some of the American schedules, especially some of the territories.
Well, the money in America is terrible, and it's still terrible.
Yes.
I mean, people seem to think that because you're a wrestler, you're making a fortune. You're not making a fortune. You're driving 200 or 300 miles every day, and you've got to pay your own expenses. You've got to pay your own accommodation. And again, when you're doing these small shows, they build up the small shows during the week at little country halls, and you might get 50 people, 70 people, so you might get paid $20.
Yeah.
But it's going to cost you $40 in petrol, 30 or $40 for a night at the YMCA, which is most today. But then the next night you might get $150.
Yeah.
So in America, it's really, really hard unless you're in the top notch to make some decent money.
Yeah.
Even in Australia, unfortunately, the guys are getting paid less, or most of the guys, I'm not saying all the guys, are getting paid less today than what I was paying the guys in the 90s.
All right. This has been really, really good. This is lots of great information. We're on Falling Through the Ropes, the Australian edition. This is the second episode. I hope if you've liked what you see, hit the like button, the subscribe button. Hold up your book again, Ken. So, Dazzler Dunlop, Inside My Squared Circle. It's available now in all the good bookstores and some of the bad ones as well.
And through Shoreline Publishing Group, they're the best one to get it through.
Okay, yeah, Shoreline Publishing Group. And look out for the trading card. And for us as well, Falling Through the Ropes, Best of British Wrestling Channel, and also Falling Through the Ropes Extra, and Falling Through the Ropes Australian Edition. And a shout out also to any Australian wrestler that wants to have an interview just like what we have had now. If you found this interesting, I'd love to interview you, whether you're an up-and-comer or you're a legend of the Squared Circle like Mr. Dunlop here. Please get in contact, leave comments, or through the YouTube channels or Best of British Wrestling. Ken, this has been an absolute pleasure. It's been fantastic. I think we've muddled our way through this pretty well.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
All right, all the best here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care,
Bye-bye,
John.
Doran. Bye-bye.
Bye.